that the U.S. is saying you have destroyed too much of the Gaza Strip. You cannot continue to create what the Israelis have sometimes referred to as expanding the buffer zone, creating more room to expand the fence area where there's no buildings, taking a considerable amount of Khan Yunis and Gaza City and turning that to rubble, so that they potentially in the day after there is nothing left to rebuild, or that a critical mass of people decide that they want to leave Gaza altogether.
Israeli forces have moved deeper into the southern city of Rafah, considered to be Hamas's stronghold. The UN says around 300,000 people have now fled the city. Israeli troops have also been seen in the north of Gaza, with reports of tanks in the Jabalia refugee camp. Let's get the latest with video journalist Zach Anders, who's in Tel Aviv. Good morning to you, Zach.
Hi, good morning, Sig.
With Rafah, it's not a full-blown military operation. It seems to be there's a line that Israel wishes to draw, presumably not least with America, to say we're in Rafah, but it's not a full-blown ground incursion. Is that a line they're seeking to hold?
Yeah, it's a good question. Phone call yesterday with Secretary Blinken and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Once again, Secretary Blinken reported as saying that he opposes a major ground operation in Rafah. Over the weekend, the expanded evacuation order that now affects 300,000 people, also as these zones, which again, the IDF has created numbered zones all throughout the Gaza Strip to communicate where people should leave, where people can stay. And they expanded those numbered zones to include areas that include the UAE field hospital, UNRWA distribution center, and one of the main markets in Rafah. Now, this evacuation zone is still not all of Rafah City, but that eastern half of the city expanded quite considerably. Question being, and I should back up and say that this is still just an evacuation we're seeing. We have no confirmation that ground forces moved into this evacuated zone yet. But question being, is that the red line that the U.S. is discussing? And really the overall question that we're seeing reported by Axios, the split in the war cabinet is that they don't know who is going to govern Rafah, really anywhere in the Gaza Strip for that matter. They've been shopping around to different Arab states for trying to create some sort of agreement where potentially other peacekeepers would come in. The UAE says no. Saudi Arabia says absolutely not. So they are in a position now where some of the ministers who have been here before, done this conflict multiple times over their career, Chief of Staff Halevi, saying apparently per this Axios report, we can't go into Rafah, we can't make these decisions unless we know who is going to be governing after, who is going to be controlling the situation on the ground, and right now they don't have an answer for that.
Is there an argument that Israel will establish everything bar the actual ground attack and then give themselves the opportunity of just doing it quickly? I presume that's one of the things where they almost say to America, well, as they present it to America as a fait accompli, because if they ask consent of America to do it, America's going to say no, and that could lead to a problem. So is there a chance that they're just going to do it without doing that?
You back up yesterday, which was Memorial Day here. They run the alarm for about 2 minutes at 8 o'clock last night to remember all of the soldiers who have died over the state of Israel's history. And there were several ceremonies. We had the prime minister speak. Also, one of the minister of strategic affairs and the former U.S. ambassador said that Israel is defending itself for the first time in 2,000 years. And some of the responses, commentators saying, what about in early April when Jordan, the U.S., when Great Britain came to our defense and shot down Iranian drones? They continue to say, yesterday we saw a bluster of Israel stands alone. Israel's defending itself. We're making these decisions on our own. And we're in this position where, are you really? I mean, you still have to rely on the United States for these 2,000-pound bombs that are being held up. One of the things I saw yesterday as well is that part of the reason and the decision-making process about why these specific weapons the U.S. is withholding is because, one, a 2,000 bomb is not a precision weapon, but if you were to drop that at the base of a 12-story building, it would bring the building down. And that's what the U.S. has seen in Gaza City and Khan Yunis, and is saying you can't continue to lay waste. This has been so much, just as much a war about land and
Yeah.
structures. Gaza Strip, you cannot continue to create what the Israelis have sometimes referred to as expanding the buffer zone, creating more room to expand the fence area where there's no buildings, taking a considerable amount of Khan Yunis and Gaza City and turning that to rubble, so that they potentially in the day after there is nothing left to rebuild, or that a critical mass of people decide that they want to leave Gaza altogether.
And that's why Israel gets accused of ethnic cleansing, sort of basically making the place too hostile to live in for an entire group of people. Why would they Why would there be tanks in Jabalia, Zach? Because I was looking at a map of Gaza, and it's north. It's a long way away from Rafah. It's north of Gaza City.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
So this is an area that the IDF said had been cleared of Hamas now 3 times over the course of this conflict. What is remarkable, and something that has been somewhat difficult to communicate, I think, over the last few weeks, I haven't had the official sources to say as much, but it's become clear over the course of this conflict that Israel does not want to be the occupying force. And in other campaigns, especially urban wars, take the U.S. in the war on terror, there would be some form of civilian administration that the U.S. would lean on. They would hire security forces. There would be incentives. They would pay people more to be on their side, and then they would be the police officers. They would be the ones that are running the checkpoints and the aid distribution, basically controlling the ground situation. Israel does not have the capability to do that. One, with its force sizes, because of the threat Hezbollah poses in the north. They cannot dedicate that amount of personnel onto the ground in the Gaza Strip. They have to leave a certain number of reservists stationed in the north for that potential to erupt, another front that has primarily just been aerial attacks, but at any point could turn into something far greater. So Israel does not, and has proven over the course of this conflict, they do not want to be the occupying force in Gaza City, in Khan Yunis, and they just don't have the ability to do that either. So they continue to look for these partners. They can't find anybody that's willing to say they will. Back in, I think it was February, they were proposing an Arab partner peace plan where 3 different states would provide military advisors to come in and fill that role.
Zach, it's so interesting. Thanks as ever for the update. Good to speak to you.
Thank you.
That's Zach Anders there in Tel Aviv. It's an irony, isn't it, that Israel, criticised by many for being an occupying force, is not actually occupying it, and therefore every time it takes an area and you see the destruction that it causes, it doesn't put anything in place to stop it lapsing back towards Hamas. So it's the argument that the war can never be finished in that regard.
Yeah, and that was one of the arguments about how could Israel possibly know where Hamas commanders are, because they haven't tried to seal off different areas so people can move around, which makes it very difficult to identify where they need to be next. So, one that we will be keeping an eye on throughout the programme today.
And the lesson was supposed to be, you must have done these interviews as well, Kate, where you talk to someone who is around in the war on terror, and they say the biggest problem with the war on terror is we didn't have an end game. We didn't know what the future was going to say. We could go in, we can fight battles, we can take streets, we can do all that stuff, but we had no plan of how to get out of Iraq or Afghanistan. And of course, that's exactly what's happening with Israel. They don't have a plan because no one trusts them. They don't know what they want to do with Gaza. People think they have malign intents there anyway, and therefore there can be no honest discussion of an end game, which actually makes the war even harder to prosecute.
Well, I think some people would say that Israel does have an end game. It's just that nobody else wants to accept it as the sort of way forward, and that is actually one of the biggest problems, that there is a huge disagreement between allies and Israel about what should happen next, and that prevents any kind of logical discussion about how to end this. And that is a big part of what we're seeing happening now, and it's it's something we've seen David Cameron get involved. We've seen the Americans get heavily involved trying to broker some kind of way forward. But it is very, very, very difficult for Israel to see this in any other terms.
Yeah, and that does affect how they prosecute the war, undoubtedly.